Welcome. And we're going to start, of course, with a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lasok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And as you may recollect, we are on Sundays. This is a Sunday. We are going back to Genesis and continuing with the first chapter, and then just going, as they say, Keseder, in order. So here we are. And hopefully you can see the screen at this point. I'm going to make the text a little bit larger. So we actually left off in the middle of verse 14 of chapter 1. That chapter 1, of course, is that beautiful series of days of creation. And we are actually in the creation of the sun, moon, and stars. That's what all we know right now is that they're luminaries. And of course, this happens on the fourth day, which raises questions as to, wait a second, how was there day and night prior to that point? And Rashi basically is going to tell us that a primordial light, which we have read, was removed from the world because God foresaw that there would be wicked people and didn't want them to have that kind of light, because you could, at least in the words of the Midrash, you could see from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe. And God didn't want wicked people to have that kind of ability. So he took it away and stored it up for the righteous in the next world. However, Rashi tells us that, let me do the Rashi with you. Okay, so here we are. Lahavdil bein hayom uvein halayla. To distinguish, to make a distinction between the day and between the night. Mishen nignaz haor harishon. He says, once that original light was hidden away. Okay, that's what they do. Aval, but b'shiv'at yemei breshit, over the 7 days of creation, shamshu haor v'achoshet harishonim. He's saying that original light and darkness were in control. They served the shamesh, essentially, like you've heard about the shamas candle, the serving candle on the Chanukiah, on the Chanukah menorah. So the word l'shamesh means to serve, right? The original harishonim, the first light and darkness, yachad, together, bein bayom, whether during the day, uvein balayla, or whether during the night. So that's, again, that is challenging to try to understand exactly what is Rashi getting at by saying that, and to possibly say that it wasn't a physical light at that time. It was a different kind of light that was operating. I mean, maybe it's helpful to say we sometimes talk about the light of knowledge and the darkness of ignorance, and whether we're sort of speaking along those kinds of lines. At least I hope it's a little helpful in terms of trying to understand what Rashi is referring to and what the tradition is referring to by light and darkness during those first 7 days. And remember, there weren't any human beings around at the time. And the Torah wants us to be able to function as human beings and to try to understand the relationship that we have as human beings to the universe. So I hope that's information that is helpful in terms of understanding what exactly this Rashi means. But we don't expect to understand everything the first time around. And the process, of course, of knowledge is the deconstruction and chipping away and getting a little bit of deeper levels of understanding. So back into the verse itself, Vahayu la'otot, and these luminaries shall be for signs. And he says something interesting here. He says, Kesham orot lukin, when the luminaries are, lukin is essentially to be damaged in some way, right? So he's referring to, for example, eclipses. That's what he'd be referring to. like lunar and solar eclipses, where the light is cut off in some way. Siman Rahu La'olam. It is a bad sign to the world. Now, we know that for the most part, Judaism and the Torah aren't into astrological kinds of things. But nevertheless, again, trying to understand our relationship to the universe in a much more dynamic kind of sense. And this is something, of course, that I personally struggle with to some extent, but at least to be open to the idea that this is something they took quite seriously. And we should also not underplay the fact that there are some very important cultures, like out in the Far East, where the idea of the relationship to the zodiac and things like that um, actually are taken very, very seriously. So, for example, I know that in India, Indian culture, marriages to some extent are based very seriously on astrological signs and things like that. And if you'll allow me to editorialize for a moment, I don't know that we have such a better system ourselves. So I'm not sure. It's a lot takes to relationships at any rate. This is what it says. That's my responsibility to you to be able to tell you what it says. And at times, I hope, give you levels of understanding that make it easier to understand and absorb what's being said. However, he goes on to give a proof, which is, of course, going to be a biblical, in this case, biblical support. He says, Nemar, as it says, and this is interesting. He takes a verse from Jeremiah chapter 10, and he says, Me'otot hashamayim al techtu, or al techatu, something like that. He says, from the signs of heaven, right? There's that word otot. Do not be afraid. So here's where Judaism goes beyond that, because it doesn't want to understand astrological issues as having any ultimate importance. They may be important, they may be worth consideration, but they are not the ultimate controllers of the universe, because he explains now, "Be'asotchem retzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu," when you in fact perform the divine will, the will of the divine, ein atem tzrichim, you do not have to lid'og, to fear, to worry, min apuranut, from tribulation. So interesting, right? That we do take our belief in God and in the idea of performing the divine will in a very serious kind of way. And this, of course, is bordering on mysticism and understanding how the Torah then functions as a guide to help us behave in a way that is in harmony with the universe, but to go beyond that because of the belief in a transcendent, divine creator, and to say that whole way of expressing things says there's a decent way of behavior for every human being that is actually has profound significance. And again, religion essentially about discovering how to live a life that has significance. And I believe that is something ultimately that every human being is seeking, whether consciously or subconsciously. And I know I mentioned it a lot. So those are the otot, ulamo adim, right? This is what we refer to when we talk about the festivals. And I love to translate this as appointments, that is, appointments with God. Al Shem, so he says, this particularly is very sensitive to this. What about festivals? What festivals were around? There weren't even human beings around. What do we mean by festivals? He says, Al Shem Ha'atid. This actually is being referenced to the future. Atidim Yisrael, because in the future, Israel, the Jewish people, the Hitztavot al Hamoadot, they are going to be they're going to be commanded regarding these appointed times. They're going to have, we know, of course, in the Torah, the areas where we're told about these special festivals. Vehem nimnim, and they are calculated, the molad lavana, according to the new moons. So the festivals themselves, the dates of those festivals are calculated based on the appearance of the new moon and when those moments fall. So that's why the luminaries have that function in order, specifically the moon, of course, but we also know that there's also a relationship to the sun. So for example, Pesach always has to happen in the spring, and of course we know that the seasons have to do with the earth's relative position to the sun. So that's why our calendar, the Jewish calendar, is a luni-solar calendar. It's not just a lunar calendar. The Muslims have a strictly lunar calendar. Golda, I hear you.
Yeah, and without the sun, we don't get the way the moon changes
Correct.
because it's the shadow of the earth from the
Absolutely.
sun that makes the moon become smaller and larger.
That actually, okay. So the shadow of the earth is strictly got to do with eclipses. However, the fact that we have the phases of the moon have to do with the fact that the sunlight is shining on the moon relative to where we are. And
Right. It's I understand. Yes, I know, but
this,
it depending. That's why after an eclipse, the moon shows up at a different spot in the sky. But it really is. It's all three of them put together to make it work.
okay, so the eclipses have nothing to do with the festivals.
No, I
Those,
know that. I know that.
and by the way, eclipses, solar eclipses only occur at a new moon. The moon has to be in a position directly between the earth and the sun, and lunar eclipses only take place in the mid-month on a full moon day. That's the only time
I
that
was talking about moon phases. That's all I was talking
I know,
about.
I
And
know,
that does come
yeah,
from the fact where the sun is, where the moon is, and where the earth is.
absolutely,
All.
absolutely.
Yes.
But it
So
has
it all has to work together.
right, but I want to be clear that it's got to do where the sun is shining on the surface of the moon and where we see it from the earth. There is
Correct.
a lovely experiment you can do to illustrate that, and it's to take a light, right, a single light, and a ball, and to look at the ball, turn the ball, hold the ball out in front of you, and turn the ball around you as the moon, circles the earth, and you actually see the phases of the moon in that
Yes,
way.
but yes. And without the sun, you couldn't see the moon at all.
Absolutely. Oh, no, no, you're
And
absolutely right.
that's how we see a new moon, or don't see a new moon.
Correct. Right.
Right.
The
I think
sunlight,
we're saying the same thing, only in two different
we
ways.
are. I just want to be, I think there are sometimes people get confused and think it has to do with that it's the shadow of the moon on us or something, or the
Oh,
shadow.
no, 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 no. It's the other way around. It's
Right.
yes.
Okay, let's
Okay.
go. So we also had some other things too. Thank you. Ula Yamim, and for days. And that is Shimush Hachama. So he's saying that it said sun during the day, or at least sun and moon during the day and night, to indicate the day and night. We're talking about the 7 days of creation. And he says Shimush Hachama. Remember, we talked about the fact that the light and the darkness were operating that primordial light, I believe. But anyway, let's see. Maybe not. Okay. He may here be talking about currently. Currently. So I was a little confused only because he was using this word shimush and he used it before. But by the way, the word shemesh, right? He uses the word chama for the sun. Shemesh is another word in Hebrew. It's a synonym also for the sun. And notice, of course, that it means server, servant. And I wonder to myself if it's put that word is there because people worship the sun. And the word in Hebrew indicates that the sun itself is a servant of God, right? At any rate, he says the service hachama of the sun, and chama, chom, has to do with heat. It has to do with the heat that's given off by the sun. So the service of the sun, Chatzi Yom, is half a day, approximately, right? Veshimush halavana, and the service of the moon, Chetzio array, is also the other half, is when it serves, Array Yom Shalem. And these two halves, of course, make a whole. That was the Yamim, right? The days, meaning the 24-hour days. Vishanim, and years, Lesof Shasa Yamim. He says at the end of 365 days. And there's a editorial edition, Sfarim Acherim, the other texts of the Rashi, other manuscripts or printed editions, Urevia and a quarter, 365 and a quarter, Yom, 3/4 and a quarter days. Yigmaru Mahalcham, they complete their journey, Beyud Ben Mazalot, along the 12 signs of the zodiac. So the way they calculated a year was to understand the position, the relative position of the sun against the fixed stars, and the path of the sun, that is the projected path of the sun against the fixed stars, because they realized that the fixed stars that came up a little bit, I believe a little bit later or a little bit earlier every night, they realized that there was a progression of the fixed stars. And so they could project the position of the sun against those fixed stars, even though, of course, you can't see stars during the day because of the light given off by the sun. So that it took that long length of time, and they measured that against the phases of the moon. How many moon cycles took place in the course of the sun's progression against the fixed stars? Hamish Artim Otam. So it says their journey against through the 12 signs of the zodiac, Hamish Artim Otam, which serve them. So I think the serving them is the fixed stars serving the sun, the Hushana, and that period of essentially 12 lunar cycles was a year. And again, there's a note here, Sfarim Acherim, other texts, Vahu Shasa Yom, Revia Yom. So those other texts clarify at this point, that is 365 days and a quarter days. The Chozrim, and then they're back in that original position against that curtain of fixed stars. Umatchilim Pam Shniya. And once again, they start that circuit. The Saviv Bagalgal, to turn or to go through, to encircle. In Galgal is the wheel, right? So this is sort of this Euclidean understanding of the universe with the spheres, right? And Kamahalchen Arishon, according to their original journey. So this was, they had this theory of spheres going on to describe the progression of the luminaries. Obviously, we had the Copernican revolution in terms of how we calculate these sorts of things. But I will tell you that they did have calculations that were based on observation. And even though the theory of spheres, and which did not account well for the fact that there are times when the planets appear to be in retrograde, in other words, they seem to be moving backwards. It wasn't a good theory, and it was replaced, obviously, by our current theory. But anyway, this is how they describe it. And this is because we are dealing with a pre-Copernican text here. But it still doesn't deny the fact that as we observe the motion of the sun and the moon, etc., that still isn't what we see. Just not a good theory. or a theory that works. V'hayu, and they shall be, lema'orot berakia hashbirkia shamayim, and they shall be for luminaries in the firmament of the heavens, in the rakia, the ha'ir al haaretz, to illumine the earth, by hichain, and so it was. So let's take a look here. Vayhi lemorot, and they shall be for luminaries. So this sounds a little bit uh, unnecessary. I mean, we already know about this. So what's going on? So he's saying od zot yishmashu shi'iru olam. So we realize that the one thing it hasn't mentioned is the idea of sunlight and moonlight and that kind of thing. Let's see. We don't have a lot of time left, but I'm going to go on to the next verse. Okay. Vayas Elohim et shnei ha'morot hagdolim. So now we have God made the two great lights. Et ha'maor hagadol, the large light, the big light, lememshelet hayom, to govern the day. Ve'et ha'maor hakaton, and the lesser light, lememshelet halayla, to govern the night. Ve'et ha'kochavim, and the stars. So I'm going to stop here because of time. And let me just move this down a little bit. And let's see what I can do here. Just to make sure we pick it up at the right point. So we'll do this sentence again next time, next Sunday. And I'm going to stop the share. And didn't know if any of you had any thoughts or comments before I stop the recording. Okay. All right, so I'll stop the recording.